whenever, because it doesn't matter. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So
Okay,
then,
remind me again, how long are these supposed to be, Limo?
the goal was to like be less than 10, like, 8 to 10. But if it's longer, I mean, if it's not a half hour, it's fine. You remember Gina used to do these like really long ones. So
I will be brief. I'm just Siobhan doing. I'm just here to add. I'm like the color commentator.
I don't know. I've got a bunch of questions directed specifically at you. So hopefully you've seen
that's because he put them in there. I just told him I'm just going to wing this thing. So
okay. All right. Okay. Okay. So and then we'll do that. And then so the one thing I would say is that if there is any point where you're unhappy with your answer or we talk over each other, we pause, we give it 4 or 5 seconds, and then we go back and re-record. You say, we're re-recording from this place, and then our editing team will go and splice it all together. So we do not need to stop and re-record. We just kind of go straight through.
Okay. And how do I tell whether it's recording or not?
It's recording.
Okay. Oh, it says recording at the top.
Yeah, it's recording now. Okay. All right. Ready?
Let's do it.
Yep, I will.
Okay. Welcome to Triage. My name is Limo Cherian. I'm a partner in our healthcare and FDA practice in our Chicago office. And today I'm joined by Mike Hinkle from our RTP office, who's a partner, and Siobhan Salmon, who is a counsel in our RTP office. Welcome, Mike and Siobhan.
Hi, Limo. Happy to be here.
Glad to be here.
Great. Well, so today we're talking about recent FDA guidance on biosimilars. Siobhan, can you give me a little bit of background on what we're talking about?
Yeah, happy to do that. So today we're talking about FDA's recent guidance on biosimilar development and the PBCI Act. And now this guidance is revision 4. And just to provide a little bit more color and background to this guidance was published on March 9th, 2026. And it's really intended to kind of redefine the standards that's needed to demonstrate biosimilarity to a reference product pursuant to subsection 351K of the Public Services Act.
Okay, I'm going to pause you right there.
It's a Public Health Service Act.
Yeah.
Is it the PBCI or the BPCI? Because you said
BPCI.
Sorry,
you might back that up. Why don't you run that back? Do it again. Yeah, it's the BPCIA.
Can you do that answer again? Because I think you said
Biologics Price Competition Innovation Act.
Actually, maybe you can actually say the words too. So you can just jump in with the answer.
Okay.
So you want to rewind, restart, take 2?
I'm just going to say, so today we're here to, we'll just go back to that point. Okay, so, all right, so we're here to talk today about FDA recent guidance on biosimilars. Siobhan, can you tell me what the background is to what we're talking about?
Yeah, happy to, Limo. So today's draft guidance was published on March 9, 2026, and the draft guidance focuses on redefining the standards for what is needed to demonstrate biosimilarity to a reference product pursuant to Section 351 of the Public Health Services Act. Now, this is all in conjunction or based on what is called the Biologics and Pricing Competition, and I messed it up.
Biologic Price Competition and Innovation Act.
Yeah.
All right, I don't need to do the question again. Just jump right into the answer.
Yep. I'm just going to go back to BPCI Act.
Whatever you want, that's fine.
Yeah, it's in my head. Okay.
Give us 5 seconds. Countdown.
Happy to, Limo. So the draft guidance is intended to redefine the standards needed to demonstrate biosimilarity to a reference product pursuant to Section 351 of the Public Services Act. So the draft guidance was published on March 9, 2026. Right now, as of last week, there's only been one comment, and the comments are due by May 11, 2026.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to do that again. You did not say FDA in that whole answer. So I kind of need you to say FDA somewhere. All right. I
Okay.
apologize to keep having you
No,
redo
this
this.
isn't you. These recordings are always interesting. Mike knows. I had to
And it's
re-record a whole one.
and it's and
It's
it's and
okay.
remember it's the Public Health Service Act, not the Public
Not the
Services Act.
S.
Public Health
Thanks,
Service
Mike.
Act. And I think you said Public Services Act. So it should be Public Health Service Act.
And this is all being recorded right now, Mike.
We're going to start over. We'll get it.
Just
We'll
messing
get
with
it.
you. All right, here we go. So Public
Okay, wait.
Health
Okay, wait.
Service Act. I'm
All right,
just
so we're
doing this
going
for
to,
me, Limo.
okay. All right, ready? And we're going to go.
Yes, Limo, happy to. The draft guidance was published on March 9, 2026 by the FDA in the Federal Register. And the guidance is entitled Draft Guidance, New and Revised Draft Q&A on Biologic Development and the BPCI Act. Now, this draft guidance is revision 4. Comments are due by May 11th. And as of last week, there's only really been one comment. The draft guidance is really intended to redefine the standards that is needed to demonstrate biosimilarity to a reference product pursuant to Section 351K of the Public Health Service Act.
Thanks, Siobhan. So we've obviously been hearing a lot from the administration about a goal of lowering drug costs for everyday Americans. Mike, does this relate to that in any way?
Well, yeah, it does. Historically, FDA has always said drug prices are not within their jurisdiction. It's not their role to try to reduce drug prices. But when you have a statute like the BPCIA that was enacted specifically to create competition in the marketplace and thereby reduce pricings of biologic products. So if you recall, when this act, the BPCIA, was enacted in 2010, at that time, we had generic drugs for what we call small molecules. So these are your chemistry drugs. But for these type of biological drugs that are made using living organisms to make these biologics, which were becoming more and more popular and more used by patients, there was no abbreviated pathway to get those on the market. To get a follow-on biologic on the market, you had to recreate the wheel. You had to do all the same studies that the innovator did. And that made it so expensive, and then you had to compete with the innovator, that many of these biologics remained on the market with essentially a monopoly, even after all the patents had expired. So part of the congressional intent here was to reduce the cost of biologics by allowing competition to enter the marketplace. But so that's built into this. What this administration is doing here is they're trying to make it faster and easier to get those competitive biosimilar products into the marketplace. So this guidance is one approach to that. We've seen the Commissioner's National Priority Review Voucher Program, again, to try to get products through the review process faster. The agency is also moving forward with its attempt to try to find alternatives to animal testing, so the what we call non-clinical testing in animals and benchtop testing that's necessary before you get to testing in humans. It takes a lot of time and it's very expensive. So that process, the agency is also looking at that. And so you're correct. This is one of a number of things that FDA is doing to sort of indirectly, if you will, because FDA doesn't control prices directly, but they can control when competition makes it to the marketplace, which then is sort of a free market way to reduce the cost of drugs.
And Siobhan, you mentioned that this is specifically related to how biosimilars compare to the reference product. What is the draft guidance actually intended to cover specifically here?
Yeah, so the draft guidance really talks about when a biosimilar applicant can use data from a comparator product approved outside of the US as evidence that a proposed product is biosimilar to a US licensed product. So what it's doing is making sure that if you are obtaining a BLA license it changes the pathway so that previously, in order to demonstrate biosimilarity, you could only use a US reference comparator product. And so it updated that to kind of increase the universe of products that can be used to support or to demonstrate biosimilarity of a product through the FDA process. Um, Other interesting piece about this as well is that it talks about the scenario when an applicant may use the data from that. Um, in current studies, um, instead of what used to be one of the pathways would be that you would use a three-way PK study, for example, using the proposed biosimilar, the US license reference product, and the non-US license comparator product. It also changes the FDA's thinking about that sponsors need to complete at least one clinical PK study that directly compares the proposed biosimilar with the US licensed reference product to support the demonstration of biosimilarity. Now, this is all based on whether there's a determination that this is scientifically justified. And so I think it's important to remember that because it may not be applicable to all biosimilar applicants that are in the market. In addition to that, I think one of the things that's interesting about the publication of this is that close in proximity to this publication, FDA also withdrew the final guidance titled Scientific Considerations and Demonstrated Biosimilarities to a Reference Product that was previously FDA's thinking on this particular area.
So a couple follow-ups there. So for those of us who are not as well versed, what's a PK study?
It's a pharmacokinetic study.
Okay, all right, appreciate that.
No
and
problem.
Then also, but you mentioned now that they could use non-US licensed products, but you also mentioned that this isn't applicable to all the products, that there's like some sort of, I think, scientific justification. Who determines that?
So, I mean, scientifically, so that's sometimes how we help our clients to kind of come up with what would be a scientific justification or a process when looking at these particular pathways, this abbreviated pathway. It depends, and it's sorry to be a lawyerly answer here, but it depends on the product. It depends on the indication. It also depends on kind of what studies already have had. And then sometimes it depends on your scientific meeting with FDA. That's why it's important to really talk to FDA early to kind of be able to develop a baseline for what may be relevant scientific justification for some of this testing and to really kind of apply to your licensure application.
Appreciate that. And Siobhan mentioned that the FDA had withdrawn some final guidance titled Scientific Considerations in Demonstrating Biosimilarity to a Reference Product. So why, Mike, why is that important that that was withdrawn?
Yeah, I mean, really, that was an outdated guidance, and it's been replaced. They replaced it with a guidance October of last year. And what's happened, as I mentioned, the BPCIA was enacted in 2010. And at that time, it was well recognized that it was going to be difficult to establish biosimilarity with these products. These are not like the classic, chemical drugs that can be tested in a pharmacokinetic comparative study and show, oh, the blood levels are the same, and we can show it's the exact same molecule. It's very difficult to show that these products are exactly the same. In fact, the standard for biosimilarity doesn't require exact sameness. It has to be highly similar, and there's a recognition that there could be some differences in the structure because these are very large molecules, thousands of times larger by weight than a simple aspirin tablet, for example, in terms of the active ingredient. And so over the years, it's evolved from a starting point where it was sort of assumed that you're going to have to do comparative efficacy studies. So Siobhan mentioned pharmacokinetic studies. That's just a measurement of comparing the active substance in the bloodstream. Is it getting into the bloodstream? It's not measuring whether it's working or not. A comparative efficacy study, you're comparing, does it treat the underlying condition or disease or symptom, and does it treat it just as well? So you're comparing actual efficacy. And it was assumed that initially for these biosimilar products, you would probably have to do one of those. Well, over time, FDA has determined that no, what's really important in establishing biosimilarity is the analytical sameness, that you can show that the molecule is the same. And if you can show that the molecule is sufficiently similar, then maybe you don't have to do a comparative efficacy study. You can just do one of these blood level pharmacokinetic studies. And the guidance, the latest guidance iteration of the Q&A guidance that Siobhan talked about says you may be able to just do that comparative pharmacokinetic study on a non-US licensed product, which is important because those products tend to come out first. So an innovator may come out with their EU product first, and you can get a head start by doing your comparison to the EU product and then coming into FDA and explaining why that comparison to the EU product is equivalent to a comparison to the US licensed product, which the statute requires you to be biosimilar to. So they withdrawn the old 2015 guidance was really just a recognition by FDA that the technology has moved and that comparative efficacy studies aren't necessarily the gold standard, and in many cases would not be required to establish biosimilarity. So that's sort of in conjunction with this recognition of being able to use non-US reference products that saves money, helps a biosimilar get to market faster. The pulling of the 2015 guidance is a recognition that these comparative efficacy studies are not necessarily going to be required in all cases, and in many cases, if it's a simpler molecule, would not be required at all, and rather the focus is on analytical similarity.
So would you say that basically would ease the entry for new applicants to bring products to market by taking away that barrier?
Yes, comparative efficacy studies are extremely expensive and time consuming, and the outcome's uncertain many times. So but by saying clinical efficacy studies aren't going to be required in many cases, it saves time and saves resources, which ultimately means these biosimilar products can get to the market faster, provide the competition that's necessary to drive costs down.
Yeah. And to add to that, Mike, just to add to Mike's note there about the more streamlined process related to comparative efficacy studies versus comparative analytical assessment. FDA published a guidance in October 2025 that Mike is talking about, titled Scientific Considerations in Demonstrating Biosimilarity to a Reference Product, Updated Recommendations for Assessing the Need for Comparative Efficacy Studies. And I think that goes to the point of trying to help products get to market sooner. In the guidance, as Mike referenced, FDA notes kind of how technology is advanced over the years and provides that available analytical technologies can structurally characterize highly purified therapeutic proteins and models in vivo functional effects with a high degree of sensitivity and specificity, and it can do that using in vitro biologic and chemical assays, right? So meaning that those studies, the analytical comparative analytical assessments in general are sometimes more sensitive than, or at least FDA believes, than comparative efficacy studies. And in order to do that streamlined approach, you want to consider this when the FDA or the industry or the applicant want to consider this when the reference product, the reference product and the proposed biosimilar products are manufactured from clonal cells, which are highly purified and can be well characterized analytically. And the relationship between the quality attributes and the clinical efficacy is generally understood. And I think we have a large understanding of what is needed from a clonal cell line perspective. And then finally, when the human pharmacokinetic similarity study is feasible and clinically relevant. So just some notes on that updated assessment.
So there are times when it makes sense to do these streamlined approach based on those characteristics that you just mentioned.
Right.
Okay, I appreciate that. Well, I guess the question is, taken together between the new guidance, and the withdrawal, what does this actually mean for manufacturers?
Well, I think it means that there is the possibility for more flexibility from FDA, and that these guidances taken as a whole show us that there are some options sometimes where you can reduce your development time and shorten the time to market. But you really have to carefully look at these guidances and come up with a rationale. As Siobhan said, you need to have a scientific rationale. You need to plan what you're going to do and go into FDA. As we tell all the time, we don't ask FDA what we do. We tell FDA what we intend to do. And so these guidances we need to look at and carefully structure your plan, your development plan for how you're going to establish biosimilarity. And you have more options now. For example, if it's faster to use a non-US licensed comparator product, that's an option now. But you have to plan for that, and you have to think that through.
And if it's time to market is faster, is there possible for it to lower costs as well? I mean, is that in terms of the approach that's taken?
Yeah, generally speaking, if you're reducing time, you're also reducing cost, because you're doing fewer studies. And so, but when we say you can reduce the need for, say, clinical studies, that means you may have to spend even more time and money on the analytical similarity work. And you must stay up with technology. The technology is moving to analyze these molecules in new and different ways, and the FDA is going to expect you to have the latest technology for your analytical similarity.
Yeah, and just to add to Mike's point, when you're talking about biologic, you're talking about an extremely difficult manufacturing process. So any help that a manufacturer can get to kind of truncate the time to market is really important from the front end perspective, manufacturing, and then kind of all your studies. But then also, if you are first to market versus second or third to market with your biosimilars and the like, that can equate to real financial differences in terms of your processes. So I think all of that lends to kind of providing a carrot, if you will, or incentives for innovation.
Well, I appreciate that. So are there any specific dates that our listeners should be keep in mind?
Well, I think the only date in regards to the draft guidance is the time for comment. And the deadline to submit comments is May 11, 2026.
Great. So, any last, given all these movements at FDA, Mike, is there any sort of like final takeaway that you'd recommend for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, FDA is willing to work with you. What we see from this, we see a FDA actively saying, we'll help you find ways to shorten the development. But they're not going to do your work for you. And you've got to develop a plan. You've got to stay up with what FDA is putting out there, stay up with the latest technology, and put together a good package to FDA. But if you do that, you can shorten your time to market and get to market faster with expending fewer resources to do so.
Well, thank you. We will obviously stay tuned to see how these policy changes impact the market and have you back to talk about them. Siobhan and Mike, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Limo.
You can stop recording.
Okay.
Mike just left, so.
I know. Let me figure out how to stop recording. Okay, stop recording.
Okay.
Stop.
Okay.